Hello everyone, and welcome back to Game Easy, Roll Good. Today we're actually taking another look at the Ranger damage in the 2024 Player's Handbook. This is expanding on a video I did about 2 weeks ago. I'm doing some initial looks at some damage using a strength-based Ranger, and we're still going to be using a strength-based Ranger in this video. Before I get started with that, if you are new to this channel or you just are a returning viewer and haven't subscribed yet, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It helps me out quite a bit. But today, specifically, we're talking about the Ranger, and we're actually adding a subclass this time, so let's go ahead and just jump into it and see what we're working with. 2 weeks ago, this is what we had, so I basically had a strength-based Ranger with a polearm, using the push mastery with spike growth. That was one build that I had. On this graph here, it's this middle blue line that goes down the middle towards the end there. That was with push mastery and spike growth with a pike, I believe it was. It's pretty decent early on, and then it just kind of fell off late game, which of course is understandable because we weren't scaling our damage in any way. We just added spike growth. It was also just very unpopular. People didn't like that I used spike growth, which is understandable, but I just kind of wanted to see what happens if you just throw that on there. And then after I did that, I did another build where we still use spike growth early on, but we slowly phase it out as we get better things to use with our spell slots. Then I also included things like AoE, instantaneous AoE spells like Conjure Barrage, Steal and Strike, or Conjure Volley, whichever I felt were better at the time. I think it's worth doing those as a Ranger, although people were mad that I didn't include single target only damage. So we'll correct that this time, where I'm still going to include AoE spells within certain restrictions, but I'll break out single target damage as well, so we can take a look at that. So this week, what we're doing is we're looking at the Ranger. We're not going to choose a specific race. We're using the Beastmaster subclass. We're choosing the Farmer background because it gives us a +2 to our strength and 1 to wisdom. It also gives us the tough feat, which makes us a little more durable in melee. Our starting stats, which I know you're probably seeing some suspicious stuff there, but just hang with me for a second. For our starting stats, we're getting 17 strength, 10 dex, 14 con, 8 intelligence, 16 wisdom, and 8 charisma. The feats that we're taking in order are Heavily Armored, Polearm Master, Great Weapon Master, +2 to wisdom, and then the Boon of Irresistible Offense. Our weapon masteries will start off with level 1 and 2 with a short sword and scimitar for 2-weapon fighting. And then at level 3 on, we're going to use a halberd for cleave. And then for the fighting style, we're using great weapon fighting, which has the average bonuses for each of the die types that you can see there. Some limitations for this build: you do have a lower armor class before level 4 because we only have a 10 dex. I know not everyone liked a strength-based Ranger, and I totally get that. I'm just continuing with it because I think it just generally has the ability to perform well if you build around it in a certain way. All the numbers for this video will be based on the strength-based Ranger. However, I did break out a slightly different build that invests back in your dexterity and then lowers your wisdom and constitution a little bit to make up for it. It is just kind of the sacrifices we make with this particular build. But if you wanted to be in a situation where you had decent dexterity so you could multi-class if you wanted to, you can see what the numbers look like there too. And it's actually maybe better in some situations. So yeah, because we have low dex, we actually can't multi-class with this particular build, which is fine, I think, in this particular situation, because I'm not looking to multi-class. I just want to see what the Ranger only could do. And of course, for that reason, we must take Heavily Armored so we can get a respectable AC once we get to level 4. I also think that the Strength Ranger, works well on paper, but like I've kind of mentioned here, it isn't the class fantasy that people think of when they think of a Ranger a lot of the time. If you think of like Magic the Gathering, you have like the Garruk, the Planeswalker there. He has probably a strength-based Ranger if you consider that. But I think in the world of Dungeons and Dragons, people think of like Drizzt and people who are like 2-weapon fighting or using bows and things like that. Also, the other limitation that a melee-based Ranger has is that a lot of the early spells that deal damage, at least, there aren't really a lot of spells that we can use to increase our damage, especially in a single target scenario. Some general assumptions for this evaluation: we're going to start with 4 combats, 4 rounds each. That's going to be sort of our daily DPR is what we're working with. 1 short rest, which is irrelevant to this Ranger. There's 1 short rest, which is irrelevant to this particular Ranger, at least. There's no outside source of advantage or disadvantage. Concentration doesn't fall, which is admittedly a pretty big assumption, although it's just easier to work with. And then a base 60% hit chance across the board, assuming that our main stat is on curve. So some build or class specific assumptions. For spells, we will use instantaneous AoE spells while concentrating once we're able to. We'll only ever be doing 3 targets, and like I said, we'll separate single target damage from AoE damage so we can see what the kind of the loss is there if we just do single target. We will always leave 1 spell slot at a given level unused, assuming that we use it for utility or some other purpose. I think that just makes more sense in the way that someone might actually play the game. But we will always use the first spell slot available for damage. So like when we get our first 4th level spell slot, I'm going to use that for damage. But once we get our second 4th level spell slot, I'm going to leave that one unused, assuming that we use it for something else. And then casting or moving Hunter's Mark when we're using it will take up 2 bonus actions per combat. For weapons, we will start with 2-weapon fighting for the first 2 levels, as it's just better, and then the class features make it easy for us to switch masteries. Feats, for the Polearm Master reaction, we're going to set that to 50%, unless we're otherwise unable to do it. And then Polearm Master bonus action attack, we'll just use that as often as possible. It competes with casting and moving Hunter's Mark, or commanding the Beast Companion to act in some situations. And then the Hue attack, the bonus action attack from Great Weapon Master, will only happen on crit, which is base 5% or 10% with advantage. Some additional assumptions for the Beast Master specifically. The Beast Companion doesn't die in combat. The Beast Companion is always in range for cleave. Cleave attack on the Beast Companion will be converted into a Beast Strike. We'll talk about that in a second. Beast of the Land will be used except when conjure woodland beings, where air will be used, and the average damage is actually the same. The air beast just lacks the sort of pounce feature that does extra damage. The pounce from the Beast of the Land will occur once per combat, subject to accuracy, but we're not factoring in prone to the conditional size limitations on it. We can't guarantee that the creature that we're attacking is always large or smaller. And then share spells for that ability, it isn't cast twice. The description specifically says when you cast a spell on yourself, it also affects the companion. For that reason, I'm assuming that for Guardian of Nature, that we can't choose the other mode for the beast when we cast Guardian of Nature for strength on ourselves. So our beast won't have any benefit from Guardian of Nature. And then Conjure Woodland Beings will effectively be the same spell with a greater area, rather than 2 separate spells that could maybe trigger independent sources of damage. It's basically one spell that can trigger the same source of damage. Moving on from that, we're going to talk about real quick how we're using Cleave. So for the Cleave Mastery, we're only really interested in the first sentence of this feature. It says, if you hit a creature with a melee attack roll using this weapon, you can make a melee attack roll with the weapon against a second creature within 5 feet of the first. That is also within your reach. One thing that occurred to me while I read this was that I didn't account for the fact that there could be turns where we miss every attack. Although once we have extra attack at level 5, and especially once we have Polearm Master for the bonus action attack, I think the odds of us missing every attack each round are actually pretty low. So I'm not too concerned about it. I would imagine this is probably a less than 1 DPR difference for not factoring that in. So then for the beast in combat, the highlighted text is what we're concerned with here. It says, you can sacrifice one of your attacks when you take the attack action to command the beast to take the beast strike action. So we can see that Cleave does not require another hostile creature, just any creature that is within 5 feet of the first creature. The Beast Companion allows us to sacrifice an attack during our attack action to command the beast to use the beast strike. So starting at level 3, we can use the Cleave Mastery to target our Beast Companion and then basically launder that attack into a beast strike against a target within range. How we're using spells with saving throws. So for instantaneous AoE spells with saving throws, such as Conjure Barrage and Conjure Volley, again, it's only ever going to be against 3 targets. The enemy save bonus is going to be the average bonus for monsters whose CR is 1/3 of the character level, rounded up. This will be as pulled from the 2014 Monster Manual. The chance of failure or success will usually split one enemy in most cases. So for example, Conjure Barrage deals 22.5 average damage per target on a failure. So the average pass fail, if it's 50%, will be 1.5 enemies succeed and 1.5 enemies fail. So the fail damage and the succeed damage will be multiplied by 1.5 respectively. And then of course the final DPR is the total spell damage minus the opportunity cost times the number of casts per day, and then divided by the number of rounds per day, which is 16 because we have 4 combats with 4 rounds. The opportunity cost, of course, represents the damage that we give up by choosing to cast that spell instead. And then finally, if the DPR is negative, we stop casting the spell. That doesn't occur in this particular evaluation, but I wanted to point that out. For continuous spells with saving throws in single target, i.e. Conjure Woodland Beings in this case, we'll talk about Conjure Woodland Beings a little bit later, but for this purpose, the enemy save bonus is going to be the average bonus for monsters whose CR is equal to the character level, as pulled from the 2014 Monster Manual. So starting at level 1, we have all our stats here at the top. As we move on, there will be things highlighted in green. That's going to be what changes at each level. And then the changes will also be highlighted in the calculation, so you can kind of see what has been added on each step. So starting at level 1, just like the last video, nothing has changed here. We start off with 12.1 DPR. The same is going to be for level 2. We do get our great weapon fighting style. It doesn't affect 2-weapon fighting, so we still have 12.1 DPR. Moving on to level 3, we get our Beastmaster subclass. So now we're switching to our Halberd. We're using the cleave mastery to cleave off onto our beast and then use that attack to sacrifice it for the beast strike against the same enemy. And then, of course, the beast of the land has that pounce. Again, occurs once per combat. So all of that is down below. We go up to 14.2 DPR. And then moving on to level 4, we get heavily armored. So our strength goes up, which means that our damage goes up a little bit. And we can also see that our beast accuracy goes down because we didn't increase our wisdom at all. So that's worth mentioning, but we go up to 14.4 DPR. At level 5, of course, we just get extra attack, so we get to 23.1 DPR. At level 6 and 7, there's no changes on those levels, so again, we still just have 23.1. At level 8, we get our Polearm Master, so this increases our strength to 19, which is not enough for another bonus. We can see that our accuracy actually drops a little bit, as does our Beast Companion, since it is also off-curve. So our DPR now increases to 28.6. At level 9, this is where we start throwing in AoE spells, because we have 3rd level spells now for Conjure Barrage. So we get it once per long rest against 3 targets. The average dex save of a CR3 target is +2, which is a 60% failure rate. All that math is down below, so we can see the total DPR is 30.7 if we're including Conjure Barrage or the AoE damage, and then 29.4 for single target. At level 10, we're just working with a different CR of monster, going up to CR4. But there's technically no change because the bonus doesn't change, so it's 30.7 in AoE, 29.4 in single target. At level 11, we get our Bestial Fury subclass feature, so our Beast Companion can now attack twice when we command it to Beast Strike, and they can also benefit from the damage of Hunter's Mark once per turn. The chance to apply Hunter's Mark will be the chance that the beast hits at least once, and then we also get an additional use of Conjure Barrage now that we have 3 level 3 spell slots. So the math has changed down below. We go up to 40.5 DPR with AoE or 37.1 in single target. At level 12, we get our Great Weapon Master feat. So our strength is now fully on curve, so we're up to 60% accuracy. So if we look down below, we can see that in AoE, we're doing up to 48.3 DPR now and 45.8 single target. So real quick, now that we're getting to level 13, this is where level 4 spells come online. So we're going to talk real quick about Conjure Woodland Beings. So again, the main reason I'm evaluating Conjure Woodland Beings, I know probably a lot of us saw Treant Monk's recent video about how broken it is in certain situations. But again, we're only evaluating in single target. We're only doing that because Guardians of Nature isn't available if you're only using 2024 rules. Or there's going to be no assumption that we're also getting assistance from allies to trigger more Conjure Woodland Beings procs per turn. And we're not going to assume that we're using any particular cheese strats that wasn't already available to us. So basically, it's just me and our beast, and that's what we're going to use. There's 2 scenarios that we're basically evaluating. So there's going to be the one where an enemy always tries not to end their turn in Conjure Woodland Beings, and then there's another scenario where they always end their turn in Conjure Woodland Beings. And then we're just going to average those 2 to get our final number. So in the case where an enemy always runs, our round 1 will be casting Conjure Woodland Beings. And then bonus action, if we don't have the Beast Spells feature, which comes online at level 15, we will use our bonus action to command the beast to attack. If we do have the Beast Spells feature, we will use our bonus action to command our beast to ready their action to move once the enemy leaves our Conjure Woodland Beings. And then rounds 2 through 4, we'll attack twice, use the bonus action to command the beast to attack if we don't have Beast Spells, or bonus action command the beast to ready their movement if they leave the Conjure Woodland Beings. In this particular scenario, we always get a reaction for our opportunity attack. The pet cannot use their reaction to opportunity attack because they need to use their reaction for the readied action. And then as we go on, technically, for this particular build, it would actually be better to just attack as normal in a single target scenario for sure, because we do quite a bit of damage with all of our attacks and with our beast damage as well. And this gap only widens as our attack damage increases. We don't actually do that. We just kind of keep using Conjure Woodland Beings as we described it here, but I just kind of wanted to point that out. And then for the always stays scenario, we have casting Conjure Woodland Beings and commanding the beast to beast strike on round 1, and then rounds 2 through 4, attack twice, beast cleave on that attack, bonus action, we disengage and re-trigger Conjure Woodland Beings. Because one of the features of Conjure Woodland Beings is that you get the bonus action to disengage. So if an enemy starts their turn in your Conjure Woodland Beings, that means you haven't been able to trigger it for them yet. You can bonus action disengage, back out, and then walk back towards them to trigger that damage for that turn. For this particular one, we never get a reaction because we're always keeping the enemy within our reach. So moving on to level 13, we have 2 things that we're evaluating here. So we have Guardian of Nature once per day, and then the rest of the combats are using Hunter's Mark, or we're doing Conjure Woodland Beings once per day, and then the other combats have Hunter's Mark. So there's kind of 2 scenarios we're evaluating at the same time. For Guardian of Nature, for those who don't know what it does, the effective thing that it does a couple things for us. The one thing that we care about is that it gives us advantage on strength-based attacks, and it gives us 1d6 damage on weapon attacks as well. So moving on to the actual math, again, everything that's changed here is in green. I highlighted the beast contribution to damage in the Conjure with Being section because I don't break it out like I do in the Guardian of Nature math. But for Guardian of Nature specifically, we have 53.6 in DPR with AoE, or 51.2 in single target. The total DPR for Conjure with Beings is going to be 51.5 with AoE, or 48.3 with single target. So right now we can see that they're pretty close. I mean, it's only like even in single target, it's only like 3 DPR difference, which isn't too bad. So then at level 14, we get Nature's Veil. We get this 3 times prolonged rest because we have a +3 to our wisdom. It affects 2 rounds of combat if you use it before you attack because it uses your bonus action to activate. We'll use it during Hunter's Mark since Guardians of Nature gives us advantage already. We'll sacrifice one of our Polar Master bonus action attacks to activate. And because, one thing just to kind of note here is that because we're increasing our personal damage so much, the actual effective increase of things like Conjure Barrage and our AoE spells is going to be reduced. So here's all the math here. So for Guardian of Nature, we have 58.5 with AoE, or 56.1 in single target. And then for Conjure with Beings, we have 56.4 with AoE, or 53.2 in single target. So we're still maintaining about that 3 DPR difference between Guardian of Nature and Conjure with Beings. At level 15, we get our Beast spells feature. This is what allows us to share the spells that we cast on ourselves with our Beast. But for the math on that one, again, Guardian of Nature is exactly the same at 58.5 or 56.1 in single target. Conjure with Beings goes up slightly to 56.8 or 53.6 in single target. And then moving on to level 16, we get +2 to our wisdom, so our beast attack damage goes up a little bit. Beast accuracy increases a little bit now. So adjusting for that math, we are now at 61 DPR for Guardian of Nature with AoE, or 58.1 in single target. And then for Conjure with Beings, we're at 57.7 with AoE, or 54.1 in single target. At level 17, this is where we quite a bit changes. So this is when our proficiency bonus goes up, which changes our attack action and our save DC. We get Conjure Volley now because we have a 5th level spell slot. We get this once per long against 3 targets. We get the Precise Hunter class feature, which gives us advantage on the targets marked by Hunter's Mark. Hunter's Mark is going to replace Guardians of Nature. Nature's Veil is no longer being used because we have advantage all the time. This also opens up the 2 level 4 spell slots that we were using on Guardians of Nature, so we can use level 4 Conjure Barrages now, twice per long rest against 3 targets. Notably, this is not applicable to Conjure with Beings because we're still using those spell slots for Conjure with Beings. And now we're also using Conjure with Beings now 2 out of the 4 combats, although I think that's technically worse. But we're just using our spell slots the way that we said that we're going to use them. It would probably technically be slightly higher DPR to do Hunter's Mark 3 times per day still, and Conjure with Beings only once per day. Factoring all that in, we have 72.8 for Hunter's Mark with AoE, or 65 DPR with single target. And then for Conjure with Beings, we have 63.7 with AoE, or 58.7 with single target. So now there's a much bigger gap between these two because the Hunter's Mark, at least in single target, of course, because the Hunter's Mark has advantage all the time. And that just makes a huge difference, especially with the number of attacks that we can make. You know, with the reliable bonus action attack, possible reaction attacks, as well as 2 main attacks, as well as just having a bigger weapon, right? So Conjure with Beings just kind of falls behind here because we're no longer really scaling our damage with that particular spell. Moving on to level 18, there's not really a change here other than the save for the Conjure with Beings. So factoring that in, we're still at 72.8 with AoE for Hunter's Mark, 65 single target. And then for Conjure with Beings, we go to 64.8 and 59.8 in single target. At level 19, we get our Epic Boon of Irresistible Offense. We add our Strength score to critical hits. This also greatly increases our normal attack damage, which is going to reduce the actual effective value of things like Conjure Barrage. So calculating all of that in, we have 76.7 for Hunter's Mark with AoE, or 71.3 in single target. And then 66.5 for Conjure with Beings with AoE, and then 62.9 in single target. And then lastly, at level 20, we get our Hunter's Mark becomes a D10 instead of a D6. For our weapon damage, this becomes a 5.8 average damage, so all of our damage increases by about that much, or whatever the difference is between the D6 and the D10. And then for the Beast specifically, it stays at that 5.5 because they don't benefit from great weapon fighting. So adjusting for all that math, we end up with a final DPR for Hunter's Mark as 82.1 with AoE spells and 77.9 in single target. And then Conjure with Beings, we have 69.1 with our AoE spells, not including Conjure with Beings, just the Conjure Barrage, Conjure Volley. and then 66.3 in single target. So here's what that looks like on a graph. We're starting with just the Beastmaster that's using Guardians of Nature. This doesn't include Conjure Woodland Beings yet. The bottom line, of course, is the Warlock baseline here, and then this line that starts up and then starts separating at level 9. That's when we get our AoE spells. So we can see that for the most part, they stay pretty close to each other. There's a big gap that comes online at level 17, and that's not only because we have permanent advantage from the Precise Hunter feature, but also because we're using Hunter's Mark all the time and no longer using Guardians of Nature, that we get not only the 5th level spell slot for Conjure Volley that comes online at that time, but the 2 4th level spell slots for 2 4th level Conjure Barrages that come online at that time. So that's why there's that big jump. And then the gap closes by level 20. So these are pretty good numbers by the end. This is still pretty low very early on. That's worth noticing, that it's something that the Ranger just kind of struggles with overall. But a big reason that this particular build is so low early on is because we had to take heavily armored first. So that's one thing to note. That's definitely a drawback because that is happening at the levels where most people are playing. So if this is not a high level one shot where you're starting where this particular Ranger is already good, then you maybe don't want to do this, right? So adding on the Conjure Woodland Beings, so the again, the bottom line is the Warlock baseline, and then the line starts separating at level 13. That's when we get our 4th level spell slots. The top line is just the regular Guardian of Nature with AoE that we looked at on the previous graph. The middle line in this fork here, the light green line, is Conjure Woodland Beings with our AoE spells like Conjure Barrage and Conjure Volley. And then the bottom brown line on this fork is the Conjure Woodland Beings with pure single target. So we can see that Conjure Woodland Beings fails to keep up with the permanent advantage of Guardians of Nature and even the Hunter's Mark later on. But it's pretty close early on before we get that big boost. For this, that means that ranged weapons and 2-weapon fighting builds for Rangers would see probably just much higher gains from using Conjure Woodland Beings, even in single target, just because their weapon damage is so much less than what we're doing here. And of course, this isn't to say that Conjure Woodland Beings is bad. It's just maybe not great in single target unless you're really cheesing it. Of course, because it can absolutely break, and it is very powerful in multi-target encounters. Again, I didn't account for using it in multi-target because I don't know how we would evaluate that either, unless I just assume 3 targets like I did for Conjure Barrage. Maybe I should have done that. But yeah, this is what it looks like, at least with assuming that Conjure Woodland Beings is being used in single target. So lastly, I did say that I would look at a low wisdom strength ranger that uses higher dex so that you're able to multi-class, and maybe you don't need to take heavily armored, because I don't want to take heavily armored if I don't have to. So here we start with 17 strength, 14 dex, 12 con, 8 int, 14 wisdom, and 8 charisma. It's squishier than I would like to be, although we do still have the tough feat from the farmer, but we do have the ability to multi-class if we wanted to. I didn't in this case, but we could if we wanted to. We take Polearm Master at level 4, Great Weapon Master at level 8, and then Mage Slayer at level 12 to cap strength. Plus 2 wisdom at 16, and Boon of Irresistible Offense at 19. I think if you wanted to go for pure damage, Sentinel would be a solid choice at level 12, strictly for more damage. I wanted to kind of think more logically, I guess, and just say, what I would choose for is I would want to shore up my mental defenses. I'd love to get Resilient Wisdom, but we can't fit it in the build. So I think Mage Slayer kind of fills in that pocket a little bit. Allows us to cap our strength and allows us to automatically save once per long rest against a mental save. So this trades slightly less damage at the top end for much more competitive damage during tier 2. You can see from levels 4 and 5 that we spike up quite significantly. There's still technically a noticeable gap in this tier between other martial builds, although it's much closer than it was for the pure strength Beastmaster that I evaluated first. So I think there are some reason to be concerned about the Ranger. I think, this build looks decent, at least. It does involve using strength-based weapons, which isn't everyone's cup of tea, especially for the Ranger class. I don't think there's currently a dex-based build for the Ranger at all that really puts up similar numbers. And so since those are the builds people want to play when they're playing a Ranger, there's just a very big gap between them and other martials still. The early subclass features, even for damage-oriented subclasses for the Ranger, aren't nearly as impactful as other subclasses. And although Rangers can do things martials never could, I don't think that warrants such a massive gap in power. I mean, this was the same thing I said about the nerfs to ranged weapons in 2024, and a lot of people disagreed with me on that one. Rangers aren't full casters, so I don't think they should be penalized so much just for having such an interesting toolkit available to them. And then, like I said at the beginning of the video, there are just too many spells that favor ranged weapons early on for the Rangers, so there's no way to boost our damage in those early tiers, at least in single target. However, I also think there's reasons not to be concerned about Rangers. I think you may not want to be built around Hunter's Mark, but The fact that they did two things here, they not only gave us all these other benefits for using Hunter's Mark, but they gave us a bunch of free castings of Hunter's Mark to the point where we basically don't need to use spell slots for it anymore. That gives us so many more spell slots throughout our adventuring day that can be used on other things. You know, if you're using older spells, you can get Absorb Elements as a defensive tool. All your level 1 spell slots can just be basically Absorb Elements slots, or if you pick up Shield from Magic Initiate, you can get, you know, shield slots, essentially increase your defense that way. A lot of things that you can do now that you have just more effective spell slots per day. I think Rangers do have much more in common with casters than other marshals do. Once they get second level spells, things like Pass Without Trace, Silence, and Spike Growth are all very strong spells that can provide massive party benefits in a way that no other marshal really can. You know, Pass Without Trace can skip encounters, or at least allow you to approach an encounter on your terms. Silence can break an encounter, whether it's either you're versing other spellcasters and just shutting them out of basically all their most powerful spells, or if you're just fighting like Banshees or Demi-Liches that have that shriek that drops you to 0 if you just fail to save. You cast Silence on your party, you're just not going to take that damage, and that's a lot of survivability that no other marshal can provide. And then Spike Growth, of course, we know when it's used well that it can do just, you know, massive amounts of damage, or even just, you know, above average amounts of damage as well. You know, again, no other marshal can actually do that. There are other classes that have these spells, but there are no other classes that have all of these spells. For third level spells like Conjure Animals, it might be marginally better than Hunter's Mark in single target to use Conjure Animals. However, it's also a third level spell slot, so you have to think of the opportunity cost there as well for just such small gains. Whereas if you save it for like an AoE fight, you can have Plant Growth, put that under a persistent AoE from an ally and make it so much harder for enemies to get out of there. There's just a lot of things that you can use your higher level spell slots for outside of boosting single target damage. Fourth level spells, we have Conjure with the Beings, which we know can be busted in the right scenario. Grasping Vine as a grapple on hit, it is not a saving throw. So you can also just set up restraints with things like the rope and the chains and the adventuring gear. Freedom of Movement is also just a powerful spell if you want to prevent yourself or a key party member from being paralyzed or restrained from if you know that's going to come up in certain situations. By the time you get 5th level spells, Hunter's Mark is kind of already the best single target spell you have, assuming you don't have regular advantage otherwise. So that just kind of leaves the level 5 spell slots open for either upcasting a strong spell from, you know, your lower levels, or just saving it for, you know, a nice Steel Wind Strike or a Conjure Volley, or even a Tree Stride if you're just trying to get your party from one place to the other. Which again, a Tree Stride is something that no other marshal can do for their party. You have to keep what other benefits Rangers have over their marshal companions when kind of thinking about what does their actual damage profile look like. I'm not saying that all these things make up for it, because again, this particular build looks good, but is not the way that people want to play. So I think there needs to be a lot more help for ranged and 2-weapon fighting builds specifically. On that note, what I'd like to see, and this isn't an exhaustive list, just kind of things that popped into my head, I would love to see modal spells at levels 1 and 2 that have both melee and ranged weapon options. So instead of things like the Hail of Thorns only being used on a ranged weapon, maybe there's a spell like Hail of Thorns and then has a ranged weapon, you know, subheading, and then a melee weapon subheading that does similar things but operates just basically differently for both melee and ranged weapons. I'd like to see something like that. I think spells like Spirit Shroud and also Conjure Minor Elementals would help out 2-weapon fighting rangers quite a bit. Just more in-class support for 2-weapon fighting and ranged builds, I think, is kind of a missed opportunity that they should have put in. You know, even if they wanted ranged weapons to be doing less damage in 2024, but I think doing that and also not giving the class that uses ranged weapons kind of the most is kind of defined the most by them, not giving them a bunch of damage as well. It's a very big missed opportunity, and kind of Rangers kind of feeling the double dips and nerfs that way. Hunter's Mark, I wish it was applied on hit like Favored Foe from pre-2024, and that it was movable on hit if the enemy drops to 0. I don't mind the concentration for Hunter's Mark, but I think the bonus action clutter, as someone who's been playing a Ranger for like a year and a half now, the bonus action clutter of Hunter's Mark is what drives me the most crazy about it. Then for Swift Quiver, I think they can just remove the concentration from that. It unfortunately comes on very, very late in the Ranger kit, as it is a level 5 spell, so you need to be level 17 Ranger to use it. But I think it's so good that you should be able to use that and Hunter's Mark at the same time. I know some people have been saying that they removed the concentration from Hunter's Mark at their table. That's probably fair, and it kind of solves this problem. But I think I would do it the other way around personally. So let me know what you would like to see for the Ranger specifically. You know, what do you think about these numbers? You know, I think the big problem here is that we don't have a similar build that works as well for dex-based rangers, either melee or ranged. And I think that is a big problem. So how do you think that you'd be addressing that at your table? Are there any changes that you've made to specific ranger features that address those problems? Because there's especially that big gap in tier 2 where they're just not able to compete with other martial characters. So let me know down in those comments, what are your thoughts on it? What have you done at your table, if anything, to help rangers out a little bit? I think just adding certain spells to their spell list also could help out quite a bit in some situations. But yeah, let me know down in those comments. And again, while you're going down to those comments, please hit that like button. If you are new to this video or you're a returning viewer and you just kind of liked what you saw here and want to see more, please consider hitting that subscribe button, even set that notification bell if you really want. But I appreciate all you guys' time, and I'll see you in the next one.